People in the West are having less kids these days for a variety of reasons, one of which is more adults view children as barriers to the lifestyle they want to live.
So today we're debating the question, are children an inconvenience or are they a blessing?
We're going to open up about our journey and end up with a look at a controversial passage in the Bible that radically transformed the way we see ourselves, our careers, and our families. This is the Balanced Family Podcast with Ben.
And Jessica, there's a lot to balance when you have a family. Marriage, kids, health, career, while you're trying to balance all the opinions out there on how to do things right.
Today, we'll cut through the noise, tackle hard questions, and share stories as we try to get to the heart of the things that really matter.
All right, I've been saving this dream for you for this podcast because I had a dream last night.
Yeah, you started to tell me.
I started to tell you.
Don't tell me.
It was perfect.
We're
for
around
this.
each other too much. Like sometimes we got to be like, save it for the podcast.
And it was just perfect for this episode. So I had a dream last night that there's a lot of it that's still fuzzy. It was a very long dream, but the end of it was I had a baby. I had another baby. So like we had 3 girls. They all were older. And I had another baby. I was in a hospital. Our baby came out looking really weird. Okay. So our first daughter, when she was born, she had a whole head of hair, a lot of hair.
Yeah.
This baby had even more hair. This baby had looked like someone had taken a straightening iron and had straightened her hair. It was like black. The hair was black.
And how long was it?
What? Like down to like her ears.
Wow.
Okay.
Which
And she
would
had
not happen.
really bright blue eyes. And then in the dream, this doctor, I think in part I had this dream because I had a doula client who's been having some issues with advocating to her doctor. And so inside of this dream, I like birthed the baby like perfectly, like in 3 pushes. This is so funny. It's like such a doula thing for me to dream this, but I was like dreaming that I was using the purple pushing where you like close your lips and you like that. And then I was like, oh yeah, I need to push the other way, the way that I teach. And so I breathed down and like I pushed and she came out like super fast. And I was like, that's right. And then this doctor took my baby and he had this bottle full of red liquid. And he was like, I'm going to now feed, it's so weird. I'm going to feed your baby this like red sugary syrup. And I was like, oh no, you're not.
It was like red food dye. Is that what it was? It's like
maybe
sugary red food dye.
It was weird. I like advocated and was like, no, you're not. Hand me my baby. I'm going to breastfeed her. It was like this. It was so dramatic
weird,
and so weird. But we had another baby in our dream. And today we're talking about having children and how do you know whether you should have children, when you should have children, how many children you should have, how to view having kids. We're kind of getting into it. And I just want to make sure you know this dream was not from God. Okay. We are done having kids.
Or was it?
No.
Was it?
It was so weird. Okay.
Yeah, that is super weird.
That's not a God dream. That's just a weird Jessica dream. Like combining birth doula stuff with like,
that was funny. It's like a lot of how your just daily life stuff is tied up into that.
It is funny.
And the hair, that is really interesting.
It was
like
really creepy.
hair.
Dude, our baby looked really creepy.
That was really weird. But yeah, we're going to talk about adorable little heathen blessings. And I love the title. I came up with that title because it comes from a quote from Martin Luther. Martin Luther had like quite the sense of humor. Sometimes pretty crude, honestly, but he would refer to his kids as little heathens. And a lot of times he would do it like ironically, like he was writing a letter to this lady to ask her to be their godmother. And it was like, the Lord has blessed us with another little heathen. But when you're a parent, like you get the humor in that because they're so adorable. They're so precious. Like the sensation of seeing your baby for the first time. I mean, there's no comparison. And even as they get older, there's this tender side of you that is just like, oh my gosh, like kids are so precious. And then literally like 1 minute later, you can be like, they are heathens. They are little monsters. Like sometimes you just have these full range of emotions toward your kids.
It's true.
We're going to kind of break that down and talk about what has impacted our viewpoint of our kids that has really changed the way we perceive life since even the early days. So the context for this though is just like society in general does not society values kids less.
I would agree.
That is a mathematical fact. Literally, people are choosing not to have kids. People that are even married and in long-term relationships choosing not to have kids. We're in the lowest birth rate ever, 1.64 children per mom. Like that's the lowest it's ever been.
Well,
in the West.
It's just funny too, because I feel like anytime I ever post anything about birth, especially on TikTok, all the comments are like, and this is why I'm not having kids.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for the birth control, lady. People are very anti kids, it feels like.
Yeah.
Not everyone, obviously, because then we have the opposite, which
well, I'm going to touch on
talk
that.
about in a second.
But listen to these stats. This is about the pet industry. So there's a lot of talk about being parents.
Parents or dog mom.
Yeah. And so just listen to these stats, Jesse. In the United States, pet ownership rose from about 56% of households in the 80s to 66%. So you're like, well, that's just 10%. Well, it's like, well, look at the trend though with the birth rates going down. It's an interesting thing to think about. The pet ownership industry has increased from 90 billion in just like a few years ago, 2018, to now $151 billion in 2024.
That's almost double.
That is a huge increase in expenditure of pet ownership. So not only are more people having pets, they're spending more money on their pets. And it's just like pets. And I laugh about some of those stats and some of the creators out there that whenever they talk about their pets, I'm like, you obviously don't have kids. Cause like you talk about your pet like they're, the center of your world, because they are. But I remember before we had kids. Do you remember? I know it feels like a distant memory before we had kids.
But we definitely, we had pets. We had
we
two
were
dogs.
into our dogs.
We were very into our dogs.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I would never put a sticker on my car that said dog mom.
Yeah.
Definitely not to that level.
Yeah.
We most certainly bought puppy chow. Okay.
Yes.
We didn't buy the refrigerated dog food, but we were into our dog. We loved our dogs and we still do love our dogs, but it changed once we had kids big time.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we used to have two dogs. Like when we first got married, like you had your dog. And then we went and got me a dog, and we both had like our dogs.
Yeah.
And
then when we had kids whose dog left,
we were like, what dog?
Your dog.
Yeah.
Ben's dog was the one that we ended up rehoming.
Well, you know what's cool? I've been trying to find this and I can't find it, but we made a video that when we announced the birth, when we announced that you were pregnant, a video of
oh my gosh, we have to find this video.
You can see why we're creators, because we made this video. It was like
11 years ago.
Dialogue between our two dogs. Our two dogs found out that you were pregnant, and they were basically like, one of us is not going to be able to stay here. We didn't know we were going to get rid of one of them in the future, but they were both like, dude, one of us isn't going to be able to stay here in the house. And so they had this competition and with like the Rocky theme music.
We had them like, one of our dogs went on a treadmill.
One of my dogs could run on a treadmill.
So he was running
training.
the treadmill.
Yeah. And they're like,
I can't believe we made that video. I totally forgot about that.
I mean, that's an anecdote for not having kids. Like the work we put into making this video.
Well, we played it at our church to announce it. It was really fun.
Yeah.
And we were kind of, back then especially, I guess still, we were known as kind of like the couple who does kind of go wild, crazy, kind of all out things. That's just who we are. But
anyway, I was like, we were really into our dogs. And then it was after our second kid that we had to get rid of one of them.
Yeah. Mostly just because we weren't really paying attention to him enough. And we knew we needed to get him.
Yeah.
He now lives on a farm. Just for all of y'all to know, we rehomed him to a good place. But then you have like the flip side. And I want to talk about this.
The flip side of what?
The flip side of like our society not really wanting kids and not liking kids. But then you have like the flip side, which would be the Duggars. And just in general, I actually follow a lot of creators on Instagram who like, they just have a lot of kids. And that like their whole Instagram lifestyle is about having a lot of kids and why they have a lot of kids and what they do that's different with their kids. And it's basically like the Duggars TLC show, but on social media.
Do we need to define this, because this is going to be on YouTube forever? Like 10 years from now, somebody might watch it and be like, who are the Duggars? The Duggars are a family on TLC. Yeah. They had a show that it was like, it started out as 18 kids and counting?
No, it was young. It was lower than that, but it
16?
ended up going to like 21. I think.
They have like over 20 kids. Here's the interesting thing about the Duggars. They live literally like 5 miles away from us right now, where we're filming this podcast.
Yeah.
And it was...
we actually know where they live. We actually do you remember we went to our birth class?
Yeah.
Right next door to their house.
It was, yeah.
So there was a house right next to their house that was not owned by the Duggars, but we attended our first birth class, one of the sessions there. And I remember like looking and being like, oh my gosh, that's where the Duggars live.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh. And then I think I even saw one of the Duggar girls there. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Because naturally they're constantly in the birth world.
Well, obviously.
Because like the midwife lived at that house next to him.
Well, and some of them are into natural birth and stuff.
Absolutely.
Well,
anyway. I would say we run into a Duggar probably like 3 times a year.
Yeah, definitely.
And
I see them all the time at a particular event that I go to, like for secondhand clothing and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like an influencer night that they host, and all the Duggars that live here go there. And I've never said hi. I should say hi to them. I always am like a little weird about that. I don't know.
Jessica, I can't tell you how many pregnant women that I run into that I want to talk to them about stuff, but it would be so creepy.
Yeah, very creepy.
Be like,
do not do that.
Hey, I'm like a birth account creator or whatever. It would be so weird, but I always want to talk about.
So weird.
I know. I don't do it.
Oh my gosh.
But
I would be like, get away from me, you creeper.
But I want to be like, I know more about birth than probably you do. We're going to come back to the Duggars at the end, but let's try to remember what was that conversation like with us whenever we started to talk about wanting to try.
I mean, first of all, we always wanted kids and we knew that we did. And I think we knew we didn't want to have them right away when we got married. If you've listened to episode 2 of our podcast, you understand
we were
why.
Working out a lot of other things.
We had other bigger fish to fry. So once, I think things kind of started calming down. We had just bought a new house. Oh no, we bought that house when I was pregnant. No. When did we buy a house?
You were not pregnant.
I was not pregnant.
No,
that's right.
I think buying that first house probably put you in the mood.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we'd been married for about 3 years. I feel like that's like a common time for people after they've been married a few years. Then first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes baby and a baby carriage. It's just like what you do. I don't remember that it was anything in particular. Like, do you remember anything? I think for me, it was just kind of like, it is time.
Well, I knew I always wanted kids, and I knew I wanted 4 kids. Like I was like, we're going to have 4 kids. That was like always what I wanted. And
I wanted many kids. I didn't know for sure how many.
But I remember whenever it was like time to like try, it was just like, oh my gosh. Like, and I don't actually remember being super excited about trying. It was almost like moving into a world I just knew nothing about, and everything was so comfortable and simple that it was almost just like, oh man, we're about to lose something. It was kind of the sensation, but I knew deep down in my heart it was just like this natural step. And I remember talking to a friend of mine, and I was kind of like sharing some of my apprehensions, and he was just like, dude, it's not complicated. Like, you just have kids. This is what you do. And he didn't mean it like this pressuring thing. You got to have kids. But it was almost like he reminded me of, it was kind of like, Ben, you want to be a dad someday. Like at some point you've got to have a kid to be a dad, And I knew that was right. I knew that's what was coming for us. So, but I remember feeling a little apprehensive for sure in the beginning.
I was excited, I think, but I had just made that career move where I was starting the new school that I had mentioned, I think in a previous episode. I actually found out I was pregnant. So if you're a teacher, you understand how dramatic this is. I found out that I was pregnant in July, like right before the school year started. So I knew, and I was like the supervisor, the person running the show at our middle and high school. And so I was like in my first trimester starting school, and I knew that my maternity leave was going to hit in the spring, which was not ideal. And anyway, it was the timing, because when we first started trying, we had heard, sometimes it takes up to like 6 months until you get pregnant. And so we were like, okay, we got time. We got pregnant the first time. And
never had a problem moving forward.
And I very much know that there's other people that have the opposite problem, and definitely not like gloating about that, but it was definitely shocking.
It was like, whoa, okay.
It was like, okay, I'm pregnant. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm pregnant. Wow.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, and as the dude as well, even like from that period of trying and then you getting pregnant all the way up until the birth, it's all surreal and it's not even real yet. And this is what we talk a lot about in Balanced Birth Couple, and why we create all our resources for men is to try to help them come to awareness. Like, your whole world's about to turn upside down. And I remember like it all being surreal until I held the baby in my arms, and I cannot describe it. It's like this thing deep inside of me got activated. It was almost like, it was just like a whole nother side of me just like switched on. I remember literally the way I viewed the world changed. It was like when you hear news story, when you just have the evening news on, there's going to be stories about this event going on for kids and this thing going on for parents. And, this bombing that happened in Afghanistan that killed, 30 children, or like everything that I consumed in media changed. It was like, oh my gosh, children. Like, I know what it's like to have a child, and just imagining these people lose their children. Like, I just remember it hitting way different than before you have kids, and getting into just some of the decisions we had to make and navigating that world of parenthood. It was absolutely, I remember it, there were stresses, but more importantly, I remember from day one, I was immediately just like more inspired to live life.
Yeah. And I think for me, after we had our first, I mean, obviously it massively changed my world. And I could go on and on about all the things that it changed for me. I definitely think I had like postpartum anxiety. There was a lot there with my first. But what's amazing is that you forget childbirth and how, hard it is, and postpartum, and you're like, I could do that again. I remember when with our firstborn, like not exactly the exact moment, but I remember how I felt when it was like all of a sudden I was like, I want another baby. It didn't matter that all of the stress that I had felt in that first year. So our first two were actually 21 months apart. Mm-hmm. So that meant I got pregnant, I think, when our firstborn was 13 months, I believe, somewhere in there. So, fairly short after we had, I mean, now I know a lot of people wait a lot longer, but it just felt right. It was like, let's have our kids close together. And we could do a whole episode on spacing and
I'm sure we will.
All of that stuff, because there's a whole lot to consider. But I don't know, for me, it was just kind of like, let's go, let's do this. I'm in this mode. Like, let's have another baby. And we knew for sure we wanted to have another one.
Yeah.
And when we had our second, I would say, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, the transition for me from 1 to 2 was the hardest, for sure. What would you say?
I would say like mentally and emotionally for me, the change from 0 to 1 was bigger, because there's just so many unknowns. And I think from my objective perspective of watching you as a mom, that there were a lot of things that were harder the first time, just because the questions are like, what does this mean? Like, you don't know anything until, you just have your first kid. But I would agree that jump from 1 to 2, I would say it was just so physically exhausting, especially
that's what I remember.
Especially
most.
2 under 2.
Yes.
I mean, it was just like absolute, complete mental, emotional, physical exhaustion. And I definitely saw that for you too.
Yeah. And I think our second, she didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a time for the first 4 months of her life.
Yeah.
She was, I would say, pretty colicky.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't actually have a whole lot of friends. All of my friends had just started having babies when I had her. So I was the only one with 2 that was in my peer group. And I was the only one for sure that had a colicky baby.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really have a whole lot of support with it. It was just kind of like, I guess this is just normal. And then she got diagnosed at year 1. She was 1 year old when she got diagnosed with her disease. That definitely, I think, maybe is part of the reason why 1 to 2 is so stressful, was that also our firstborn is spirited. Yeah. I'll just say that. So when she hit 2, it was like, actually before 2, really more like 18 months. It was like, okay, like, oh my gosh. So I was dealing with a very spirited toddler on top of a very colicky baby on top of, I was still working.
Yeah.
And so that was just, that is the reason why I think so much of it was so stressful. But, again, what's interesting is that we still did not feel like our family was complete.
No.
And do you want to talk a little bit more about that process?
Well, I think we can go deep on that in another season, but...
Another episode, you mean?
What did I say?
Season.
Oh, that's funny. There will be many seasons. Where we were at managing our second daughter's disease, which still have not gone deep in. We need to someday. We've mentioned like every episode, but logically, we should not have even tried. And
to have another one, you mean?
Yeah, it just felt like the time was right, even though we were managing so much. And I'm so glad we did. Even the timing of that, it was so right.
Well, I had a miscarriage, remember?
You did have a miscarriage, and we took a break from trying after that.
Mm-mm.
We didn't?
Mm-mm.
Wow.
No, we literally waited a month, and then we tried again, and I got pregnant with Joe.
Whoa.
Yeah. So hardcore. I think a large part of it was that we actually wanted to have another kid.
Right, yeah.
And I remember feeling like our family's just actually not complete.
Right.
I get asked all the time, like, how do you know when you're done? Or how do you know when you should have more kids or not have more kids? The Duggars would say, you're never done.
Yeah.
You know, you just got to keep going and going. And we'll talk more about that later. But I think for us, we had a lot to consider. But at the same time, I was like, there's another Lagrone that's supposed to be here. And even after I had the miscarriage, some people would be like, oh, well, maybe the miscarriage was that, and then you need to stop. But it was like, no, like I actually we're supposed to have another person around our table. And so, yeah, we got pregnant, I think about a month, maybe 2 months after my miscarriage. And then I had her in July. Yeah.
Yeah. And after that, like
we were done.
We were done.
Like almost immediately after I had her, I was like, I remember telling someone, I was like, I mean, I'll like leave the door cracked like a millimeter for it. I was like, but I think I would have to have an angel from the Lord literally come and visit me in the flesh and tell me, thou shalt have another child for me to be open to that. Also, because I had a lot of complications with that birth. And so there was just like a lot that had happened that it was like, I don't think I should be having children anymore, you know?
I knew we were done too, but I love the idea. That's the thing. I know it's not a God thing, and I know it's not like we should have another kid, but it's like I love the idea of having another kid. And honestly, just like having an even number is nice sometimes when your kids are all young and together and playing and fighting together. Having an even number for them to pair off would be nice. But yeah, 3 kids made everything more complicated too, with just like booking a hotel room and just vehicles and logistics. And it would get tough after 3 as well. But I love the idea of just having kids around. And I've never been like a super kid person. Like, even though I worked in schools and I've served youth like my whole life, I've never just been like, oh, I just love kids. The reason I love being a dad is because it's just like, I know that's what I was born to do. We tell that to our audience a lot on Balanced Birth Couple, and it sounds real cliche. Your body was made to give birth and you were made to be a dad. It sounds really cliche, but it literally is like in your DNA. It's literally true. Like, you were made to do that. And so what we're experiencing, and just to bring us back to what we're talking about in this podcast, that what we're experiencing as a society that views like having children as just like this like add-on, or like this
superfluous,
as almost like a hobby.
Yeah.
Having kids now is being like demoted to like a hobby. It's like, oh, that's for those people, but you know, the people are really having fun. They're doing this other stuff. And it's like, oh, you're into kids? Okay, you have kids. But that really has never been a part of the human experience. That choice has not really been like in the consciousness of humans. In fact, like the survival of your village, of your family, of your clan, like it was dependent on multiplying.
Right.
And when you think about just your life in general, like we have more time and recreation than ever to even fill our time. Like throughout most of human history, like your family was your world and your time was spent with your family. And that's just like what life is. So life's just become like very different now for today's society. And what we're seeing in the way that a lot of people talk about having kids is like, they're so scared of it. Like, oh my gosh, like you're going to lose something. But I think my biggest reflection after becoming a dad was like, I gained so much more as just a man, as just experiencing the full spectrum of the human life.
Right. Well, and I think too, this whole idea of what you're even losing. Okay. Well, what you're losing is like, I don't know, just kind of selfish.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, maybe that might rub people wrong to say that, but it is. It's self-focused and in its essence, because we as humans, what we want to do is we want to give back. I mean, that is a part of who we are. You don't want to live your life just for yourself. And people who do tend to be really depressed. And so there's nothing better than having kids to help you get out of yourself and be able to serve someone else. It is incredibly gratifying. So when I look at, quote, what I lost, and people could look at me and be like, okay, she has a master's degree. She blah. You know, I graduated with honors and all this different stuff. It's like, you know, I should be doing something amazing with my career and with my life. But like I have a little sign that I bought, I think it was like from Hobby Lobby or something, but it said, the greatest work that you will ever do is within the walls of your own home.
Right.
I believe that within my core. It is the one of the most important parts about me.
Yeah.
It's not me. It's who I am as a mother is one of the most important parts of my identity because of what it produces inside of me and what it produces inside of my children. And so, yeah, it's like, yeah, sure. Like I lost, I don't know, like my ability to go do whatever I want, whenever I want to, but like, really? Like that's like nothing in comparison to what I've gained, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I think having kids is great. I highly recommend it.
Yeah. And I want to qualify about what you said about being depressed. You weren't saying if you don't have kids, you're going to be depressed. And there's plenty of people that don't have kids, and like I respect that decision. And what you were saying is that living a life focused on yourself, it will always end in disaster. And you can have kids to live a life, and you're still focused on yourself. But the point, I totally agree with what you're saying, is that we are trained in our society to think about self, individuality, my dreams, my hope, my career. Like that mentality will never satisfy you.
Right.
And if you have that mentality, you will hate parenthood. But the greatest joy, as you see, like in Christ, in Scripture, the greatest joy is to give, is to sacrifice. And there is no more sacrificial context than parenthood. It is like,
and if
death
you have kids, you're
self.
Like, preach.
Like there's so much deep, like spiritual,
it's day in, day out. No, you get no break. It's relentless. Like, you can choose to go volunteer. You can choose to go this, that, and the other.
There's
like when you have
kids,
compares. Like they up at 6 a.m. like feed me. And you're like, I'm absolutely exhausted. I do not want to feed you, but I am going to literally get up and feed you because I love you.
Yeah. When you make the switch and start having joy is when you start to love the death.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's a deep spiritual principle, is like from death comes life. That's literally like the pillar of our faith in Christ, is like life came through his death. And when you finally die to yourself and you discover a life that you just can't even articulate. And that is the bedrock of the joy of parenthood. And it's a great principle of a book. We need to do a whole episode on this book. This is a great book called All Joy, No Fun by Jennifer Senior. All Joy, No Fun. Like it describes, the subtitle is The Paradox of Modern Parenthood. And there's a lot of research in it that basically like parents are on the surface miserable, unhappy, burnt out, just totally exhausted, but they're more joyful, more fulfilled than ever in their entire life. And that's the paradox of parenthood. Is like, it is sacrifice. It is not a hobby. Kids are not a hobby. They're not a pet. They're not a pet. Like dogs and cats are cute and cuddly all the time.
Like we did. You can't just rehome.
Yeah. You can't rehome your kid. So it's no fun on it compared to like getting to travel the world and do whatever you want. But it's all joy if you perceive it right.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that was what I was kind of saying earlier. Like obviously people who don't have kids can live a selfless, sacrificial life. I think that's the point, is that then that actually has to become a lifestyle choice, because you don't have these external inputs forcing you to not be self-focused at 6 a.m. Like you actually then have to say, okay, how am I going to structure my life to be others focused? And that's totally possible. And you're going to live a very joyful, fulfilled life. Yeah. But like, I think my point was that we as a culture, we're so focused on self-care. We're so focused on finding me time. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff, even with all the mom culture, about, oh girl, you just got to go, get yourself a latte and a massage and go have some me time. And then you're going to be like totally ready to be a great mom. And the thing is that like, no, that's actually just not true. That's not what's going to help you. Enough. And I can say that from personal experience because I thought that would be what would have helped me when I was a stay-at-home mom. And there was like a reality of I did need a break. I'm not saying that I didn't need a break, but what I did with that time was actually what was incredibly important. I couldn't just like go and be super self-focused. I needed to actually recharge myself in the way that I knew would help me be less self-focused and actually be able to give to my family even more. And so,
got me choked up just thinking about, like, you're just so right, because I remember times that I would go and have alone time and I just want to be with my kids.
Right. Isn't that funny how that is?
Our culture's brainwashed us to think it's like all about me. It's all about me time. And I'm so thankful that I became a dad to know that it's not just all about me. And so when I hear other guys, and not just guys, but people in general, like degrade the power of parenthood, the nobility of it, of the sacrifice, when I hear people, it's just like I have a lot of compassion for them, because I know that they just don't see. Right. They don't know how beautiful it truly is. So anyway, got to get back on track. Got to get back on track to conclude that section. There's no amount of self-care you can do that's going to fill that void. It's like you were made to sacrifice, and it's a beautiful thing. And let's shift gears, though. Didn't see that coming. Let's shift gears.
I don't know if you guys know this, but who's the crier in this family?
Oh my gosh.
It's him.
Yeah.
It's him. Hey, I cry. Okay. But very selectively.
Yeah. Like if we're watching a movie, like
it's
I'm
like
the cry.
Ben's going to cry. I might tear. I might have I did have a little tear listening to you, because I agree. And I think you and I, like what we're talking about is not just words.
Yeah.
Like this was born out of like deep internal struggle of like, how do we exist as parents in a culture that's telling us that we have to focus on ourselves or we're going to lose ourselves?
Yeah.
And it was like, actually, like losing myself was the best thing I ever did, because a new self emerged that is my more true self.
Yeah.
That my actual self that I lost was incredibly self-focused, was very easily, didn't have a lot of capacity, didn't have a whole lot of grit, really was concerned about herself.
Yeah.
And the person that has emerged is a person who has a lot of grit, who has, some skin in the game, who is sacrificial, who has a long fuse, and who can go and give and give and give, and not think about like, oh, what have I lost? And I'm not saying that to toot my own horn. That was born out of a whole lot of work to even get to that place. But when you're a parent, I guess you do have a choice. You could just keep being your old self and just be just like in battle. But like for me, I'm like, I want to do this work now so that then as a parent, I can be present and I can really be the best that I can be while my kids are still in my house. Because y'all, we now have an 11-year-old and almost 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. And it was so long. It was so long when they were first born.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, what? It feels like we're almost done.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's crazy. And so anyway, all that to say, we're very passionate about this topic because the nobility of parenthood is something that we just really care about a lot. Yeah. And now to bring some comedy into this, here's our pet. Our pet child.
Our dog.
Her name is Lucy. She's probably our favorite pet we've ever had. She's really cute. She needs a haircut and is about to go get one pretty soon. But anyways, here's our pet that we also love, but not as much as our kids.
Yeah. So I want to kind of wrap the discussion up on like when you take things too far in a natural perspective, and that's if you have more and more and more kids that you'll be happier. And that there's a mentality called the quiverful mentality. It comes from a Bible passage, like children are a blessing from the Lord, and you should just have as many as possible to get more blessing. And I'm going to kind of break that down as we wrap up, because we have an interesting perspective on that. It's from Psalm 127, which is actually like one of our favorite passages.
It's above our bed.
It literally has an artwork above our bed on Psalm 127. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early. In vain you stay up late, toiling for food to eat. God grants sleep to the ones he loves." And before I kick it into the children are a blessing part, like the big takeaway we have in our home is just like, we can strive to do things and accomplish things in our flesh and our human strength, but without partnership with God, like it always leads to burnout. It always steals our joy. And that for us, success does not look like, look at what we've built and accomplished. Success is that verse that says, God grants rest to those he loves. In other words, like peace is the definer of success. Are you content? Do you have peace inside of your home? And that's something that has been just an absolute like pillar that we live by. Now, what's interesting about Psalm 127 is then it like totally shifts gears almost like abruptly. And it moves on to the next verse. It says, children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their opponents in court. And so like the real natural human logic takeaway from that is like, okay, you're going to be blessed if your quiver's full. So you got to have like tons of kids. But that is completely to me like a natural perspective, not a spiritual perspective. To me, the principle that has impacted my life so much is just that first line that it's about how you view children. Do you view them as an inconvenience? Do you view them as a little heathen? Yeah. Or do you view them as your heritage, as your blessing? To me, that's all God cares about. God's not out here saying like giving you, brownie points because you had 4 kids instead of 2. It's like, that's not the way God thinks in the word. He looks at the human heart. What's more important than the number of kids you have is how do you view your kids? Are they your heritage or are they an inconvenience?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good perspective, especially then when you are in the grind and you're in, so we're still in the grind. We're not out of the grind. We're just in a different grind.
Exactly.
Just preparation for all of you guys who have toddlers.
Doesn't stop.
It does not stop. We have preteens now, so yay. But I think that that is something it's a perspective that you have to really work to implement inside of your mind when you want to say like, oh, these kids are inconveniencing me, or oh, like they're just, I really need to be doing this thing over here, or I really need to be accomplishing this thing, or it's really easy, I need to get dinner on the table or whatever. And I'm not saying like literally you're like, no, dinner's not important. My children are a blessing. Cause we could talk all about like children-centered homes and how that's also not good.
Yeah.
But I do think for me, especially, that has been a really important shift to say, okay, children are a blessing in my life. And so therefore I have to see them as a really, really high priority, a higher priority than say washing my floors and having a spotless home, for example. Like my kids are more important than a spotless home. And I know that sounds obvious, but man, when you're like rage cleaning and you're like totally overstimulated as a stay-at-home mom, like it can feel like your house is more important, but I think that's just a shift that is really important. And I think in general, our society, we have to push back against our society devaluing having children and really say like, no, children are a blessing and they're a heritage.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening today. It would mean so much to us if you left a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you heard this.
And let us know your thoughts on today's episode by leaving a comment on Spotify or YouTube, where you can also watch these episodes.